Tonight, we step quietly into the drawing rooms and parlours of Victorian England, a time of elegance, etiquette, and everyday danger. As the gaslights flicker and the wallpaper breathes secrets, we'll uncover the strange, sometimes deadly, household items that whispered harm behind lace curtains and polished silver. But don't worry, you're safe here. Let the past unravel gently like fog over cobblestones as you drift into a world of mystery, history, and hushed revelations. You're listening to Deep Sleep Stories, and the tale begins now. This video is a historical exploration based on documented myths, legends, and cultural traditions from various civilizations. It is intended for educational and storytelling purposes only. This video is a historical exploration based on documented myths, legends, and cultural traditions from various civilizations. It is intended for educational and storytelling purposes only. Some terms and descriptions are presented in academic or symbolic language to reflect historical perspectives. This content does not promote or endorse any form of superstition, discrimination, or harm. All elements are shared with respect to historical context and in compliance with YouTube's content policies. So here you are, nestled among velvet cushions in a royal carriage that creaks and bumps like it's got a personal grudge against smooth travel. The sun's a merciless overseer, beating down with a kind of intensity that would melt bronze, and not a single breeze offers relief. You're Princess Clytemnestra, regal and composed, yet decidedly annoyed. Your mother, Queen Stra, is snoring softly beside you, because apparently royal urgency isn't urgent enough to keep her awake. The journey's been dragging on ever since a sweaty, wild-eyed messenger stormed the palace with breathless news from your husband, King Agamemnon. Not exactly a love note. He's summoned you to the distant port of Aulis, and oh, by the way, bring your daughter, the beloved and, let's be real, heartbreakingly beautiful Iphigenia. No one said it out loud, but there's a wedding in the air. You can feel it, or maybe that's just the heat stroke. Iphigenia, ever the image of graceful anticipation, fiddles with a rebellious curl. This simply will not do. The whole procession comes to a screeching halt because, obviously, no daughter of Agamemnon arrives looking windswept. Handmaidens swarm like bees in silk, twisting her hair into an elaborate crown of braids. Golden jewels glint in the sun, set like constellations across her scalp. She wants to look her best. She's getting married, after all. Now you might be thinking this is a fairy tale moment. Doting mother, radiant daughter, a royal wedding on the horizon. But this is ancient Greece, sweetheart. Love matches are as common as rain in a drought. In elite circles, marriage isn't about romance. It's political calculus with veils and sacrificial bulls. A daughter like Iphigenia is a rare gem, sure, but also a pawn. And in this game, pawns don't always get happy endings. So the carriage rumbles on, each clatter of the wheels a countdown to something neither of you can name yet. The port is still hours away, and with it the man waiting at the end of the line. A king, a father, and, if whispers are true, a man desperate to calm the wrath of the gods. But Iphigenia doesn't know that. Not yet. Right now, she's just adjusting her braids and wondering what love might feel like. She imagines a handsome warrior, maybe a feast with lyres and olives, doves released at sunset, not offering, not the cold edge of divine will, not the kind of love that burns. You know how it goes. Love and marriage in the old days weren't about moonlight and roses. They were about politics, land, and who got to keep the family goats. If you were lucky, maybe you'd grow to tolerate each other. If not, well, at least the dowry was decent. And in the frosty, storm-raked lands of the Norse, marriage wasn't just personal, it was strategic. It was also sometimes ridiculous. Case in point, the tale of Thor and his missing hammer. Now, this wasn't just any misplaced household item. This was Mjolnir, the cosmic smackdown stick that kept Asgard safe and giants quaking in their mammoth boots. Without it, Thor was less god of thunder and more big blonde guy with anger issues. And when Mjolnir went missing, Thor went full Norse CSI. The culprit, a giant named Thrym, ugly, smug, and currently throned in his gloomy land of mist and mischief. Thrym had conditions. He'd give the hammer back, sure, but only if Freya, goddess of love, agreed to marry him. Cue awkward glances and divine groans. Freya, marry a giant? Not happening. She practically spat lightning. So the gods gathered around, stroking beards and brainstorming. And someone, probably Loki, because of course, floated the idea. What if Thor, you, dressed as Freya? Thor choked on his own pride. Him? In a wedding dress? Surrounded by ogling giants? Absolutely not. But the hammer was non-negotiable, and in the end, Thor did what heroes often must. He swallowed his pride, shoved himself into a bridal gown, and let Loki do the veil and makeup. Off they went, Thor in full matrimonial drag, Loki posing as his giddy bridesmaid. They crossed into giant land, their beards hidden poorly, their intentions masked barely. At the feast, things got tense. Thor, never known for his dainty appetite, started housing entire platters. One bore 2 barrels of mead, and half a bakery later, Thrym leaned over suspiciously. "My bride eats like a bear," he said. Loki, ever slick, giggled. "She's just excited and so in love. Haven't you heard of emotional eating?" Finally, Thrym brought out the hammer, laying it in Freya's lap as part of the ceremony. And just like that, the charade ended. Thor stood, ripped off his veil, and let the thunder roll. Mjolnir back in hand, he reminded everyone exactly why you don't steal from a thunder god. First to go was Thrym, jaw still slack. Then every other giant in the room met a similar fate, served hot with a side of divine wrath. With the feast now more of a funeral, and the hammer once again secure, Thor returned to Asgard, his pride a little bruised, maybe, but his manliness decisively re-established. But here's the kicker. This isn't just a tale of trickery and triumph. It's a distorted mirror reflecting Norse society. Because to pass as a woman, even in jest, Thor had to be silent. Voice was power. And in that silence was a truth about the role of women, about expectations, about how even gods could be shoved into roles to fit a societal mold. Marriage wasn't about love. It was leverage, an alliance, a bribe, a trap. But sometimes, when the stakes were high enough, even a thunder god wore a veil. Patriarchy. It's the skeleton crew steering the ship in most ancient societies. Men ruled, men raided, men made the laws and then broke them for sport. But if you peel back that crusty surface, especially in the Northlands, you'll find something a little more complicated. Something that looks, sounds, and frankly functions like a system quietly run by women in wool cloaks with no time for nonsense. Yes, the sagas love their sword-swinging Viking bros with injury in their beards and names like Skullcrusher. But those are just the headlines. At home, while the men were off impersonating gods of war and looting monasteries, life kept rolling. And guess who was running the show? Exactly. Norse women weren't strapping on armor or commanding war bands, but Make no mistake, they were the backbone of the kinship networks, the keepers of land, law, and legacy. Especially in places like Iceland, where the social fabric was more about farming and less about conquest, women called the domestic shots. Marriages were arranged, yes, but alliances weren't sealed without a woman's hand stitching together generations of power plays from behind the loom. So back to Thor. When he dressed as a bride and stayed silent, that wasn't just comic relief, it was symbolic. In Norse society, the public voice was a man's tool. But in private, behind the woven wall hangings and family feasts, it was the women who kept everything from unraveling. That brings us to another woman, one draped in silk and hope, standing on the shore of Aulis, waiting. If you'd seen her then, you'd think of vision. Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon, dressed for a wedding, a future, maybe even happiness. Her mother stands beside her, equal parts regal and wary. The air is calm, too calm. The ships meant for war sit frozen, breathless. No wind, no movement, just waiting. And then he appears, Achilles, the great warrior, the son of a sea goddess, the kind of man whose mere smile could light up a tragedy. Iphigenia watches him. This is him, she thinks, this is the man. Her father promised her to Achilles. But then Achilles blinks, confused. He doesn't know about any wedding. And just like that, the truth crashes down harder than any wave. Agamemnon lied, not just to his daughter, not just to his queen. He lied to the gods, to honor, to everything. Iphigenia runs, through curtains, through guards, through grief. Because if she's not here to marry Achilles, then why is she here? And just when you think love can't get more tragic, the story shifts west to the jagged cliffs of Cornwall. Here lies another tale born from the salt and wind of the 12th century. The story of Tristan and Isolde. A king wants peace, so he arranges a marriage with an Irish princess. To make it official, he sends his nephew, loyal, noble Tristan, to escort her across the sea. But sea voyages are tricky things. Somewhere between Ireland and Cornwall, a cup is raised, a potion poured, one sip, and the world tilts. Desire crashes in like a storm. They didn't ask for it, they didn't mean for it, but Tristan and Isolde fall in love, completely, recklessly, irrevocably. That potion, it's the mythic excuse, a narrative Hail Mary. It says, this wasn't betrayal, it was fate, it wasn't adultery, it was enchantment. Morality is swept under the rug because how can you blame hearts that were never given a choice? But of course they had choices, they always did, and like most mythic lovers, they paid for them. What happens when a knight, a supposed paragon of loyalty and honor, gets swept up in something deeper, messier, and far more human than duty? In stories like that of Tristan and Isolde, it's not just about star-crossed lovers whispering under moonlight. No, it's a layered dance of torn loyalties and tangled identities. Tristan isn't just a passionate young man, he's the nephew of the king who loves him like a son, the king whose bride, Isolde, was handed to him, not with roses, but with a treaty. And here's the thing, Isolde marries Mark anyway. The wedding goes through because politics doesn't pause for potions or poetry. But the spell, literal or not, doesn't break. She still burns for Tristan, he for her, and Mark, he loves them both. One as wife, one as heir. So the triangle doesn't just hurt, it haunts. They all dream of ruin, and the dreams come true. The moment Mark discovers the affair, the myth unravels into tragedy. He plots, as betrayed kings do. The lovers flee as cursed hearts must, but freedom offers no peace. Guilt clings to them like a second skin. This wasn't some reckless fling, it was a rupture in everything they thought they were. Love made them traitors, it also made them human. The echoes of their story ripple out, reaching across the channel and centuries into the heart of Camelot, where another king, another queen, and another knight repeat the same doomed melody. Enter Lancelot, the knight who shines not just with muscle, but with polish. He doesn't just conquer battlefields, he conquers hearts, etiquette, and the dance of courtly elegance. Introduced by Chrétien de Troyes, the master poet of the 12th century French court, Lancelot is love's ultimate champion, and his queen, Guinevere, Arthur's wife. Sound familiar? Like Tristan, Lancelot is torn between sacred duty and secret longing. Like Isolde, Guinevere is trapped in a marriage built on alliances and appearances. Their love blooms in whispers and glances, not because they want to betray Arthur, but because love in these tales isn't rational, it's transformative. It civilizes the warrior, refines the brute. Courtly love was the fantasy where power bent to passion, and knights became noble not just in strength, but in soul. And women, those very real women at court, married off to strangers and sent off to wait while their husbands crusaded, ate these stories up. Because while society told them to obey, to submit, these tales whispered back, you feel, you choose, you matter. Even the storytellers began to change. Female authors emerged, bold enough to ask, what if women weren't just temptresses or trophies? What if they had their own desires, their own moral codes, their own stories to tell? And so, amid the clatter of swords and the rustle of silks, medieval love stories quietly became something radical. Not just tales of forbidden passion, but of identity, agency, and the aching cost of wanting more than the world says you're allowed to have. Just shelter, not just supplies, but a place, a future, a second chance in the ashes of everything they'd lost. Carthage was her refuge, her rebirth. And when she looked at Aeneas, she didn't just see a guest. She saw a kindred spirit, a man scarred by fire, forged by grief, adrift like her, but still standing. But Aeneas, he wasn't free to love, not really, because gods don't care about your personal feelings, they care about fate, and Aeneas, bless his tragic, duty-bound soul, wasn't just anyone, he was destined, fated to found a new Troy, a future Rome. His story wasn't allowed to end in a sun-drenched harbour beside a grieving queen. His story had to sail on, so when the gods whispered in his ear, go, he listened, he left. Not with a dramatic goodbye, not with full explanations. He simply vanished, taking with him every promise Dido had started to believe in. And she, who had already lost one husband to violence, now lost another to fate. What followed wasn't just heartbreak, it was collapse. The love that had healed her reopened the wound. The woman who had ruled Carthage with pride and precision now stood crumbling on her pyre, her last moments not of vengeance, but devastation. She cursed Aeneas, yes, but what burned hotter was not hatred, but sorrow. Then flame. Then silence. Meanwhile, back on the beaches of Aulis, another fire had just been lit. Not in a temple or a hearth, but in a family, split in two. Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter, stood in her wedding dress. But there was no groom, there was only an altar. And a lie, because her father hadn't summoned her for love. He'd summoned her for demise, The gods demanded wind, and Artemis, the ever unforgiving goddess, was holding the skies hostage. Agamemnon had angered her, and only the life of his daughter could appease her wrath. And so he offered it, dressed her like a bride, led her like a lamb, blinded her so she wouldn't see the blade. Her mother, Clytemnestra, screamed. Aught was held back. And when the deed was done, when Iphigenia slumped, when the ropes snapped and the sails filled, Agamemnon whispered thanks to the gods and set off to win glory at Troy. But the cost followed him. 10 years of war, blood, ash. And back home, a queen with a memory like a thundercloud. Because in these stories, love is never just love. It's power, it's legacy, it's destiny. Tristan and Isolde risked kingdoms. Guinevere and Lancelot shattered a round table. Dido and Aeneas shaped centuries of vengeance between Carthage and Rome. And Iphigenia, she was a spark, one girl offeringed for wind. And with her demise came not just a voyage, but a reckoning. These tales aren't just myth, they're warnings, reminders that when love collides with loyalty, when private passion battles public duty, the consequences echo far beyond broken hearts. They shape empires, they start wars, and they never, ever leave quietly. You know how it is when you're just vibing in a foreign land after barely surviving a war, thinking maybe, just maybe, you can finally relax? That's Aeneas in Carthage. The man was battered, exhausted, and frankly, Dido's palace was looking real cozy. Carthage wasn't just a stopover, it was peace, prosperity, and a queen who actually liked him. Aeneas could have settled, he could have ruled beside her, had a family, started a new chapter. But alas, the gods had other plans, big ones like found Rome and alter the fate of the entire Western world kind of plans. So what happens when the goddesses toss a storm into the mix during a casual hunting trip? Bam, Aeneas and Dido get trapped in a cave. Cue thunder, howling wolves, and divine matchmaking that leads to a not-so-subtle moment of intimacy. It's raw, it's dramatic, and according to ancient poetry standards, that means they're married now, at least in Dido's eyes. But Dido wasn't just an obstacle in the path of history, she was history's detour. If Aeneas stayed, Rome wouldn't rise. Carthage, not Rome, might have been the empire shaping the known world. And that's a big narrative problem for the Romans. So, enter Mercury, the divine wake-up call. He zips down from Olympus, finds Aeneas lounging in a luxurious Tyrian robe Dido gave him, scandalous, and drops a thunderbolt of guilt. "Bro, what are you doing? You've got an empire to build. This is not the end game." Aeneas panics. He tries to ghost Dido, which, let's be honest, is a garbage move, but she catches him, and oh, does she let him have it. Betrayal, heartbreak, fury. She accuses him of sneaking away, of tossing love aside for destiny, and he stands there, tragic and abused, mumbling about divine commands and sacred duties. The gods made him do it. Classic excuse. But heartbreak doesn't bend to reason. Dido's devastation burns hotter than any forge. As Aeneas's ships pull away, the flames rise, not just metaphorical ones. Her palace becomes a pyre. She climbs it, and in a moment that etched itself into every Roman poet's soul, she ends it. Not just her life, but an entire alternate future. From the deck of his ship, Aeneas sees the fire, the smoke, the silent accusation in the glow of a burning city. He knows. This time, the destruction wasn't the result of war or fate. This one was on him. And Dido, she doesn't just die, she curses him. She wishes for eternal enmity between their people. And that right there is the seed of the Punic Wars. A queen's heartbreak echoes across centuries of injury and rivalry between Carthage and Rome. So when Virgil writes this scene, he doesn't just want you to feel sad, he wants you to feel the weight of Roman identity. Aeneas walking away from love isn't failure, it's Roman virtue, the triumph of duty over pleasure, of grit over indulgence. Even Mercury scolds him for looking too fine, wearing purple, and forgetting he's not here to enjoy himself. This moment isn't just about romance, it's the Roman soul. It's why Rome doesn't lose itself to softness, why it survives, thrives, conquers, but at what cost? Because even as the trumpets blare for Rome's glory, Dido's ghost still lingers, a burning memory, a love forsaken, a warning carved in smoke. So here you are again, caught in another ancient mess that smells suspiciously like politics dressed up in myth. Centuries before Virgil penned the Aeneid, Rome and Carthage had already gone at it in 3 gloriously brutal rounds of bickering known as the Punic Wars. Think Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants kind of drama. It was violent, it was legendary, and by the time Virgil was writing, it was practically embedded in the Roman DNA. Carthage equals nemesis. No debate. And Virgil? Oh, he leans into that. He doesn't just say Aeneas left Dido. He says that decision, a man choosing duty over love, was the spark that would light the centuries-long powder keg between Rome and Carthage. Love didn't just break Dido's heart, it reshaped world history. But here's where it gets sneakily brilliant, because Virgil isn't just dragging Dido for plot convenience. He's writing after Julius Caesar's assassination, in the chaotic hangover of civil war. The Roman Republic was collapsing like a badly built Colosseum, and Octavian, soon to be Augustus, had clawed his way to the top. He defeated Mark Antony, who just so happened to be shacked up with Cleopatra. Yes, that Cleopatra. Exotic, powerful, seductive Cleopatra. The Dido of real life. And just like Dido, Cleopatra was a queen from the East, draped in perfume and mystery, and very much not Roman. To Virgil's audience, this wasn't subtext, it was spotlighted in neon. Cleopatra seduced Antony into betraying Rome. Dido seduced Aeneas into forgetting his mission. Same trap, same escape, barely. So Aeneas in this light isn't just founding Rome, he's avoiding its destruction. He's a warning, a mythic redo of Antony, but one who gets it right. He leaves, he offerings love, comfort, maybe even happiness, all for the destiny Rome demands of him. But here's the kicker, Virgil doesn't paint Dido, or by extension Cleopatra, as a monster. He gives her dignity, depth, pain. He lets you feel her anguish, her betrayal. He lets you sympathize with the enemy, because love, he says, is not patriotic. It's not tidy. It bleeds across borders and makes traitors of heroes and humans of villains. Dido becomes the poem's tragic heartbeat. Not a villain, but a victim of empire. She's regal, wise, deeply human, and then undone by love, twisted into something wild and vengeful. Not because she's evil, but because she's hurt, because that's what unreciprocated devotion does. So while Rome is marching onward in triumph, Dido smoulders in the background. She's Cleopatra's echo, Carthage's ghost. Proof that the cost of empire isn't just paid in injury and conquest, but in abandoned lovers, burned cities, and the loneliness of choosing destiny over desire. You meet Medea at the edge of the known world, shrouded in mist and myth, in a place called Colchis, land of iron, gold, dragons, and daddy issues. She's the daughter of a king, but not just any princess. No, this one's an accused person. A real one. Not I make potions in my bedroom energy. Medea's got real deal divine magic, lineage from the sun god, and access to potions that melt your insides or make you fly, depending on her mood. And yet, when Jason struts in, all Greek hero and borrowed muscles, Medea turns into every awkward teen who's never been kissed. She's modest, nervous, brimming with a love so intense it practically steams off her. But even then, even when she's playing the shy helper girl, you can feel the power coiling inside her, the kind of love that doesn't just burn, it consumes. With her love as fuel, Jason wins it all. Fire-breathing bulls, tamed, serpent-toothed soldiers, slain, sleepless dragon, snoozing thanks to Medea's herbal hacks, and so the two flee Colchis, taking the golden fleece and leaving Daddy's kingdom in shambles. Medea sails away not just from her home, but from any version of herself that fits neatly into a storybook. She chooses love. She chooses Jason. And what does Jason do? He ditches her in Corinth. After everything, after kingdoms burned and injuries spilled, after she bore him sons and offeringed her family, he trades her in for a princess, for power. And just like that, the story stops being a romance and becomes a horror play. What follows isn't a tantrum, it's a reckoning. Euripides picks up the tale centuries later, hands trembling with glee. His Medea isn't just a woman wronged, she's a force of nature, a creature stitched from betrayal and brilliance. She flips the script. She doesn't cry, she plots, she doesn't plead, she destroys. And what she destroys first are the very things Jason holds dear. She harms the princess, then the king. And finally, most harrowingly, she harms her own children. Their children, not out of madness, but out of vengeance, precision, control. Euripides gives us no clean lines. This Medea isn't a villain in a cape. She's not a misunderstood heroine. She's a question. What happens when love becomes a weapon? When betrayal burns so deep it erases everything else? Motherhood, morality, mercy. And the Athenian audience? Oh, they were shook. This wasn't just a woman lashing out. This was someone tearing down the temples of marriage, kingship, family, everything polite society sat on. She didn't just break the rules, she incinerated them and left the ashes on Jason's doorstep. No wonder Euripides placed last that year, because Medea isn't a character you clap for, she's one you survive. You watch her descend, and part of you recoils. But part of you, if you're honest, understands. That's the horror. That's the brilliance. She's what happens when love meets power and finds betrayal waiting at the altar. So in the end, she flies away, literally on a dragon chariot, unpunished, unfathomable, not forgiven, not forgotten, just gone, like a storm that leaves silence behind. The Greeks weren't just obsessed with gods and honor, they were downright neurotic about order. Everything had its place, citizen and slave, man and woman, Olympus and earth. So when Medea strolls in, a foreign-accused person who dares to love wildly, act boldly, and harm strategically, she doesn't just break the rules, she unravels the very seams of their society. This wasn't just drama, this was existential horror in a chiton. Euripides handed his audience a character they couldn't neatly categorize. Medea was emotion, yes, but weaponized. She was the faithful wife and the destroyer of that very ideal. The nurturing mother who became the nightmare. The clever outsider who didn't learn to behave. She didn't just refuse the roles given to her, she hijacked them, twisted them, and burned the blueprint. And here's the sting. Jason, he gets to leave, remarry, and rise. No curses rain down on him for tossing aside his loyal, magical partner. No one questions his choices. But Medea? One heartbreak, one betrayal, and suddenly she's the embodiment of chaos. Euripides knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't just write a tragedy, he cracked open a cultural pressure cooker and let the steam scream. He forced his audience, still sticky from war and worn from ideals, to sit inside Medea's fury. to feel it, to almost understand it, and then recoil from it. Because Medea's love isn't the dreamy kind that ends with a sunset and flower crowns. It's the kind that scorches cities, that asks, what if betrayal hurts so much that you'd rather destroy than be forgotten? This myth didn't fade because it was neat. It endured because it wasn't. And woven into it all is the deeper warning from the Greeks. Love is not just sweet and noble, it's volcanic. It inspires poets and heroes, yes, but also monsters and martyrs. It can uplift a soul or gut a kingdom. It is the most potent, least controllable force in human existence. And any society that doesn't learn to shape it, contain it, or at least fear it, might just watch its walls fall to ash. Medea's tale isn't a cautionary tale about women or accused persons or even revenge. It's about what happens when the most powerful force we have stops asking for permission. We humans, we love our stories, always have. Long before scrolls, scripts, or Netflix, we huddled around flickering fires under vast, star-pinned skies and spun legends out of wolves and whispers. And why? Because reality, harsh, chaotic, bone-breaking reality, needed a little softening, or at least a little sense. See, in the beginning, we were just wandering stomachs with spears, hunter-gatherers with no real postcode. We roamed, we scrounged, we survived. But then someone figured out how to plant a seed and stay put. Boom, villages, then towns, then cities, empires. Suddenly we weren't just dodging mammoths, we were dodging taxes and squabbling over borders. And with all this new noise came the need for meaning. Enter myths. These weren't bedtime stories, they were society's emotional instruction manuals. They told us who we were, what we feared, what we hoped, and what would happen if we stepped out of line. They gave form to invisible forces, love, jealousy, fate, divine mood swings. Monsters? Sometimes those were just metaphors for the mess inside our own heads. And what do you do when your world changes too fast? War, plague, kings losing their crowns and their heads. You reach for stories. Not the sugary ones, but the ones with jagged teeth. The ones that hold your hand while asking, what would you do if your lover betrayed you, your kingdom crumbled, or your child vanished into mist? Like Prince Roswell. Not some dragon-slaying heartthrob. Just a guy who sees injustice, acts with mercy and pays for it. Exiled by his own father for daring to defy the law in favor of compassion. That's the kind of tale that sticks, not because it ends happily, but because it asks something of you. What matters more, law or love, order or honor? That tension, that endless, aching tug of war between duty and desire is where myth lives. It's how we make peace with a world that doesn't always reward the righteous or punish the wicked. Myths give chaos a plot twist. They say, yes, the world's unfair, but here's why it feels like it isn't. And even when those tales are tragic, especially when they're tragic, they soothe. Because in the myth, every sorrow has a shape, every betrayal has a backstory, even catastrophe has choreography. Take Hamlin, Grain Town, prosperous, practical, but dig beneath the wheat and you'll find a story. One of rats, a piper, and a price paid in children. Not because the piper was evil, but because the town broke its promise. And in myth, debts always come due. That's the genius of myth. It takes history's messy randomness and molds it into a story with rhythm, with purpose. It may not always end well, but it always ends meaningfully. And in a world that doesn't always offer that grace, sometimes that's all we need. Hamlin, peaceful, prosperous, a tidy little medieval town, humming with grain trade and civic pride. No kings, no castles, just guilds and burghers and a budding bourgeoisie, the kind of place that dreamed not of glory, but of rules and routine. A town built on contracts and coin where every cobblestone whispered order. And then came the piper. He didn't knock, didn't send a scroll ahead or schedule a council meeting. He just appeared. Strange, silent, dressed like a walking carnival and carrying a tune that bent the world. The rats came first, ravenous, relentless, everywhere. Clawing through grain sacks, nesting in chimney flues, sinking their yellow teeth into everything Hamlin held dear. And just when despair was chewing through morale, the piper played his pipe. A flick of the fingers, a song in the air, and the rats, hypnotized, drowned in the river, gone like a bad dream at sunrise. The town rejoiced, they clapped, they wept, and then they stiffed him. The piper came for his payment. The town, suddenly forgetful, said no. The music had done its job. The miracle had expired. Why keep paying rent on a vanished plague? The piper said nothing. He just came back. This time, it wasn't rats who followed him. It was the children, and they didn't stop at the river bank. They followed him out of town, past the fields, into the mouth of a mountain that swallowed them whole. The townsfolk searched, they screamed, but no children, no piper, no sound remained. Now, pause, because here's the unsettling part. There's a date. In 1384, the Hamlin Chronicle notes the eerie anniversary. The children had been gone for 100 years, not myth, not metaphor. A memory branded in time. Something happened, and that something is what kept the story alive, reshaping itself with every retelling like smoke twisting in wind. Some say it was plague. That demise came in musical form and danced the children away. Some say it was madness, one of Europe's infamous dancing frenzies, where people twirled and spun and collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. But the most compelling theory, migration, a quiet exodus. Recruiters had been combing Central Europe, offering land in the wild eastern territories, promises of freedom, fortune, a fresh start. And hundreds left, young, strong, hopeful. Entire bands of Hamlin's youth may have vanished into the mists of history, building villages whose names still echo faintly of home. The piper, then, was no demon. He was change, a symbol of the divide. The story? A salve. A way to make sense of the whole left behind, because no one wants to admit that their future walked away without saying goodbye. So the tale grew rats, grew music, grew myth. And by the time the brothers Grimm wrote it down, it had teeth and melody and a moral. Keep your promises, or the world might whistle your children into the dark. And somewhere in that mountain, the echo of a tune no one dares play. And here it is again, the old dance of myth and morality. When the piper took the children, it wasn't fate, it wasn't plague, it wasn't even music. It was consequence. Hamlin made a deal. Hamlin broke it. The piper didn't punish them with randomness, he gave them justice, a terrifying, tuneful reckoning. And just like that, the tale slid from supernatural spook story into a cautionary parable. Break the rules, lose your future. And as the centuries turned, so did the tale. Enter the sentimental version, the little lame boy or the blind child, too slow to keep up with the rest. The mountain closes, the song fades, and he's left behind, not to die, but to remember. Alone, it's gut-wrenching, it's Victorian, it screams with nostalgia and loss. the kind that societies use when they're too tired or too broken to rage anymore. Myths soften as we do. Then you look across the channel to the tale of Prince Roswell. A different flavour of betrayal. Not divine punishment, but human envy. A steward who plays the long game, waits in the prince's shadow, and strikes at the perfect moment. What follows is a tale of inversion, of a world where the good are cast out and villains ride away in royal robes. But not all who break rules are villains. That's where the good thief walks in. You know him? He's everywhere. In deserts and jungles, myths and movies. The one who robs not for greed, but for balance. He doesn't just steal, he corrects. A rogue, yes, but one whose blade is sharpened by justice. Which brings us, of course, to the trees of Sherwood. Robin Hood, outlaw, hero, rebel, myth. A man shaped by every century that tells his story. In the earliest versions, he's no fallen nobleman. He's not swanning around in silks, lamenting lost castles. He's a yeoman, a guy with dirt under his nails and an arrow that never misses. A walking rebuttal to authority, a reminder that wisdom isn't found in account books and tax rolls. He's the voice of the woods whispering, the rules are broken and someone has to fix them. And what do we do with Robin? We evolve him, make him a nobleman for polite society, give him a romantic subplot, add tights, but the core never changes. Whether he's dueling the sheriff or dodging drones in a cyberpunk reboot, Robin Hood is a cultural litmus test. What do we think makes power wrong? And when is it right to fight back? Because every generation has its Hamlin, its crooked steward, its sheriff of Nottingham, and every generation asks, what would we do if justice wore a green hood and carried a bow? And then we answer by telling the story again. When the world is burning, plagues in the streets, wars on the doorstep, kings chopping heads and futures into fragments, people start dreaming of someone with a bow and a backbone. And so in the shattered soil of 14th century England, Robin Hood bloomed like a wildflower in the ruins. He wasn't noble, not at first. He was clever, fast, defiant. He was everything the common folk needed when everything else was falling apart. While demise walked in cloaks and religion splintered and kings warred with their own shadows, Robin was out there in the greenwood, outwitting the rich, feeding the poor, and slipping away with a wink. But you can't stay the people's hero forever, not when power starts paying attention. By the 16th century, even royalty couldn't resist playing outlaw for a day. King Henry VII himself pranced around in tights, bow in hand, pretending to be the very thing he ruled over. But popularity has a price. When the myth of Robin started making the rulers sweat, too many people cheering for a rebel, they did what rulers always do, they tried to clean him up. Enter Anthony Munday, a master myth scrubber. He took the people's Robin and made him posh. No more dirt under the nails yeoman. Now Robin was the Earl of Huntington, fallen nobility, wronged by a few bad apples in government, but still loyal to the crown. This wasn't rebellion anymore, it was reform, respectable, palatable. Robin Hood 2.0, the establishment's outlaw. Then came the 19th century, the age of empire, of factories and fog and nostalgia so thick you could bottle it. Medievalism was in vogue, everything old was romantic again, swords, chivalry, big round tables. And Robin? He became the poster boy, a knight in tights, beloved by noble ladies, revered by good men, a green-clad ghost of England's imaginary golden age. Walter Scott dusted him off for literature. Tennyson made him lyrical. He was no longer just hiding in trees. He was nestled in the heart of Victorian nationalism, hero of hearth and heritage, a merry outlaw whose rebellion made the world feel just tidy enough to be safe. And then came Hollywood. In the flickering black and white dawn of cinema, Robin leapt from the page to the screen, swinging from chandeliers and dueling in technicolor. Each decade brought a new mask. In the 20s, he danced around American isolationism. In the 30s, he embo-passed away Roosevelt's fight for the people. The post-war 50s wanted a steady hand in a rebuilding world. The 70s gave us a weary, world-worn Robin, and by the 90s, he was multinational, multicultural, modern, a bandit of the global village. But through all the centuries, through all the rewrites, one thing stayed true. Robin lives in the tension. He's the dream of a freer life in the forest, where the law is what's right, not just what's written. He's rebellion with purpose, wit with charm, justice with a grin. He's the fantasy of not just breaking the rules, but being right to do it. And maybe that's why we keep retelling his story. Because we all secretly want to disappear into the woods, to live shamefully and freely, to fight the good fight and sleep under the stars. Because deep down, no matter the age, we still believe in the outlaw who robs with a purpose and always hits the mark. Roswell, battered and bruised by betrayal and exile, staggers into a new city, a marvel of stone and sunlight, echoing with trade and possibility. And there, in the heart of it all, he sees her. Princess Lillian, a vision that halts time, a spark in the soot of his story. But just as quickly as she appears, she vanishes, snatched back into the palace by royal summons and societal expectations. Roswell, with his mud-streaked boots and broken past, watches the gates close on something he barely touched. And as if fate weren't finished mocking him, who arrives next to claim the princess's hand? None other than the traitor steward, the man who stole Roswell's name, his fortune, and now his future. In that moment, every injustice crystallizes, the false prince on the throne, the true one among the crowd. And that's not just fairy tale dramatics, that's the blueprint of upheaval. Because Roswell's heartbreak isn't just personal, it echoes the deeper unraveling of social order. His story becomes a metaphor for every moment history throws the table over. Kings toppled, thrones hijacked, truths buried under borrowed titles. And Europe, in the 16th century, was about to flip the table hard. Enter Martin Luther. One monk, one hammer, 95 cracks in the church's centuries-old armor. And with that, the Reformation burst like wildfire through the continent, shattering families, kingdoms, identities. No corner untouched, no belief untested. What began as a theological disagreement spiraled into a cascade of wars that soaked Europe in injury for over a century. And at the center of this spiritual hurricane stood the 30 Years' War. A war that didn't just ravage nations, it devoured meaning. What side were you on? Catholic? Protestant? It changed with the wind, with who held the sword to your throat. Armies marched not just to conquer, but to cleanse. Villages disappeared, cities became cemeteries, everyone was a heretic to someone. And amidst it all, little towns like Bamberg were swept into madness, a place of rivers and reverence where the cathedral's towers reached for heaven, but the ground below began to crack. Bamberg, with its high walls and holy rituals, couldn't shield itself from suspicion, paranoia, or the shadow that crept in with every whisper, accused personcraft. Because when the world loses sense, people start hunting for someone to blame. Just like Roswell thrown out for doing the right thing, whole communities were torn apart for imagined crimes. The wars weren't just between armies, they infected the soul of society. Justice turned bitter, faith turned feral, and so as Roswell stands in the crowd, watching a liar wear his crown and claim his love, his silent outrage becomes something more, a cry echoed through history. This is not how it was meant to be. Bamberg in the early 1600s might have looked like a postcard from old Bavaria, Catholic spires cutting the skyline, cobbled streets winding through tightly knit homes, and a fortress cathedral standing tall like God's own sentinel. But just beneath that pious, orderly surface, fear, pressure, and fire licking at the edges. In 1623, Johann Georg von Dornheim stepped into this world as Prince Bishop, and he did not come gently. A Jesuit zealot to his bones, von Dornheim saw no grey in the world, only saints and sinners, and the distance between them was measured in flames. Protestantism wasn't just a different doctrine to him, it was a creeping disease, an accused person craft. The symptom. Now, accused person hunts weren't new to Bamberg, they were almost tradition by then, but von Dornheim didn't just continue the practice, he industrialized it, turned suspicion into policy. And in 1627 he built his factory of confession, the accused person house. 28 cells, torture rooms, a confession mill where screams were considered evidence, and pain was the language of truth. And if you think it was just poor villagers or mysterious old women, no. No one was safe. Mayors, doctors, entire families. If you questioned the trials, you were next. If you didn't, your silence still might not save you. Even the town's physician, Dr. Hahn, tried to resist, thought he could reason with the bishop, but soon he, his wife, his children, they were ash. One prisoner managed to smuggle a letter to his daughter, hands broken, hope shattered. He told her what had been done, the abuses, the names he was forced to give, lies, all of them, but necessary if only to make the pain stop. And it wasn't just Bamberg. Witch fever burned through all of Europe, Catholic or Protestant. It didn't matter. Scotland, Sweden, Spain. Heads rolled, fires roared. Communities cannibalized themselves in the name of purity. Why? Because the world was turning colder, literally. The medieval warm period, with its long summers and generous harvests, had ended. In its place came the Little Ice Age, bitter winters, frozen rivers, failed crops. Hunger gnawed through villages, disease stalked the roads, and when chaos reigns, people reach for certainty, for blame. And so they turned on each other, on their neighbors, on anyone whose shadow looked strange in the snow. The Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches, had already provided the script. Witches were real, they served the devil, and now they were everywhere. The trials weren't just about superstition, they were about control, about channeling panic into purpose, about turning faceless fear into a target with a name. And in towns like Bamberg, that target was anyone who couldn't or wouldn't fit the mold. And as the snows deepened and the world grew darker, the fires burned hotter. It's the year 1632, and after months, no years, of miserable, crop-rotting rain, everything just sort of breaks. You're hungry, your neighbors are hungry. Even the local cats are starting to eye you like a meal with legs. No food, no help, no hope, and no understanding of what on earth is going on. The sky won't stop crying, the fields are mud soup, and whatever folks thought they understood about weather patterns, useless now. Nature, it seems, is having a meltdown. But admitting that the universe is just a chaotic mess, Too scary, so naturally everyone starts looking for the supernatural saboteur, accused persons, because of course it must be accused persons. People huddle in candlelit rooms, whispering about curses and strange omens, and when that collective fear festers long enough, it morphs into fury that needs a target. Cue the accused person hunts, and then, like the plot twist in a very grim period drama, Sweden enters stage left. King Gustavus Adolphus isn't just swinging by, he's charging into Germany, waving the Protestant banner and scattering Catholic bishops like chess pieces. When his army nears Bamberg, the infamous Bishop Fuchs von Dornheim bails, just poof, gone. The man responsible for turning a city into a cauldron of suspicion and abuse disappears. The accused person howls. Suddenly doors open. The prisoners, bruised and broken from confessions they were never meant to survive, are freed. But there's a catch. They're told to shut up. Never speak a word about the horrors they endured. And so the Bamberg accused person trials, some of the most brutal in Europe's long, dark chapter of scapegoating, finally end not with justice, but with silence. Because that's what happens when a society eats itself. When fear turns neighbors into threats, when the flames of doubt find kindling in the minds of the desperate. And long after the fires die out, the smoke lingers. It's the start of 1838, and the rooftops of London are no longer just for pigeons and chimney sweeps. Something is leaping across them, something terrifying, something ridiculous. Depends who you ask. The 8th of January. Lord Mayor John Cowan, decked out in ceremonial robes and probably annoyed by all the ghost stories cluttering his inbox, finally holds up a letter from a panicked South London resident. It warns of an entity prowling the streets, a metal-clawed, menacing fiend, attacking women and vaulting over walls like an Olympic athlete possessed. The Lord Mayor, ever the Victorian skeptic, rolls his eyes and dismisses it. Either hoax or prank. Classic overreaction, he says. The Times runs the story the next day, and just like that, Spring-Heeled Jack stops being a rumour and starts being a sensation. You have to remember, this is a world caught in the throes of the Industrial Revolution. The air itself is a character, thick, choking and permanently tinted with soot. At night, factory furnaces light up the horizon like the gates of Hades, just cracked open, and amid that fiery fog a figure appears, long coat, glowing eyes and claws of steel. Sometimes he's devilish, other times he's got the flair of a gothic dandy, but always he jumps. Boy does he jump. And the people? They eat it up, not just in newspapers, but in chapbooks, the Victorian version of horror zines sold for pennies by street peddlers. Kids love him. Adults can't look away. Every appearance, real or imagined, is another spike of delicious fear. He's the perfect urban myth, new enough to feel modern, but echoing something ancient and primal. He doesn't just scare, he fits right into a culture simmering with anxiety over smog, technology, and strangers pressed too close in dark alleys. Whether he's real becomes almost irrelevant. He's a story now, a creature conjured not by magic, but by factories, fog and fear. A monster tailor-made for an age of machines and smoke. Because in the darkness of Victorian London, with the devil's breath billowing from every chimney, it didn't take much imagination to believe he was already here. 3 nights thunder across the tournament field, banners streaming, hooves drumming against packed earth. But instead of saluting the royal box, where a smug little man in borrowed princely attire waits for applause, they ride right past him, straight toward the crowd. The people part like a tide, and there, standing dumbfounded among the commoners, is Roswell. The knights dismount, remove their helmets, and suddenly Roswell's world flips. These aren't just any knights, these are the noblemen he once freed from his father's dungeon, the ones long presumed lost to tyranny and chains. They kneel before him, not the pretender in silk. Their voices ring out. Roswell is the true prince. Panic sparks like flint in the royal box. The steward, the so-called prince, sputters, flails, demands loyalty that no longer exists. "Arrest them!" he screams, but no one moves. "Arrest them!" he shrieks again. Still nothing. The more he shouts, the smaller he becomes. The illusion of authority dissolves like fog in sunlight. And in the end, no wedding, no throne. Just a quick descent into infamy and a very permanent display above the city gates, where his head rots in disgrace, a grim gargoyle watching over a kingdom he never ruled. Roswell reclaims his name, his crown, and his love. He weds Princess Lillian not as a pauper, not as a hidden heir, but as a sovereign with scars, strength, and the love of a people who chose him. Their kingdom blooms, not with the fireworks of conquest, but with the steady glow of peace and justice. The tale of Roswell, echoing through 16th century England and Scotland, was more than just a fireside fable. It was a balm for a society rattled by the earthquake of religious change and political uncertainty. A world where kings fell, faiths clashed, and the old order cracked like ancient plaster. People needed to believe that justice could still rise, even if it came in humble clothes, because in times of chaos, stories do more than entertain, they steady the soul. They become lanterns in the dark, guiding, warning, dreaming, reminding us who we were, who we are, and who we still might become. The best of them never really end, they just find new listeners. In the age of wolves and wind, when the clatter of axes echoed louder than prayers, the world teetered on the edge of ruin. Kingdoms were dust, stars like old gods seemed to fade, and somewhere in the ruins, a mother and her child huddled in the skeleton of a village, walls half standing, roofs clawed away by time and flame. Monsters roamed the world now, not the scaled or fanged kind, but men twisted by hunger and despair. Above them, the sky split in fury. Lightning lashed like divine whips. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, was no longer prophecy. It was happening. And in those final moments, in their last stories and whispered lullabies, people laid bare what mattered most to them: resurrection, family, honor, and the hope that something, someone, might return. In Norse mythology, the afterlife was no neat celestial filing cabinet. It was a sprawling map of fates. Heroes who passed away gloriously in battle might feast forever in Valhalla, slinging mead with Odin. But most souls trudged a different road, darker and colder. Through a sunless valley they would march, footsteps muffled by ash and fog, toward a land not of fire, but of numb sorrow. Even the gods weren't immune. Baldur, son of Odin and Frigg, glowed like a lantern in that grim pantheon. Beautiful, wise, beloved, naturally doomed. The gods saw visions of his demise. Frigg, his mother, did what any divine mom might do. She ran a cosmic safety campaign. She traveled the entire universe, begging stones and stars and weeds and wolves to swear they'd never harm her boy. And they all agreed, all except one, the mistletoe, a strange, delicate plant. Maybe she thought it too soft, too trivial. Maybe it hid, twined in shadows. Whatever the reason, Frigg missed it. And so the world kept turning, and the gods, bored immortals that they were, found a new sport. Throwing things at Baldur, rocks, spears, hammers, they all bounced off, harmless. But Loki watched. Loki, the troublemaker with too much time and far too much imagination. He heard about the mistletoe, fed it, shaped it, sharpened it, crafted it into a dart no bigger than a finger. Then he approached Hoder, Baldur's blind brother, handed him the dart and said, "Go on." Join the fun. And Hoder, trusting blind, laughed and threw. Silence. The dart struck, and the light of Baldur, perfect, radiant Baldur, snuffed out. The gods screamed, Frigg wept, Odin stared, stone-faced, and somewhere in the mists of the underworld, a new shadow stirred, because this demise wasn't just a tragedy, it was a trigger, the first true crack in the ceiling of Asgard, the quiet, unmistakable beginning of the end. And though this story was written centuries later by an Icelandic poet named Snorri Sturluson, a lawyer, a politician, a mythmaker, it carried with it the weight of worlds. Not just of gods, but of people wondering, what if the best of us can die? What then? What's left? That question, like mistletoe in a silent hall, still waits for an answer. Snorri Sturluson wasn't just jotting down old campfire tales, he was weaving them into a tapestry, a singular, tidy mythos where once there were only wild threads. In a world where gods were once boisterous, contradictory, and occasionally petty, Snorri comes in like a librarian during story time. Let's clean this up, make it coherent, and maybe sprinkle in some drama while we're at it. And in his version, Baldur isn't the fiery warrior of older legends. He's kind, gentle, the glowing heart of Asgard. Too good for this world, which makes his demise not just tragic, but the tragedy. And who is the villain? Loki, of course, trickster, instigator, practically twirling a mustache made of brimstone. Many scholars sniff the scent of Christian influence here, like incense hanging in a long abandoned chapel, but it's not dogma, it's a vibe. Snorri wasn't trying to baptize the old gods, he was harmonizing them, shaping them to resonate with the cultural chords of a people already living between two faiths, one in Odin, the other in Christ, and so Baldur's story becomes one of light, innocence, betrayal, demise, and resurrection. Yep, he dies, but he's also coming back, not unlike someone else from a certain holy book. That strange blend, pagan roots entwined with Christian echoes, isn't about erasing the old stories, it's about evolution, about a culture straddling the twilight of gods and the dawn of saints, using myth to find balance in a world that's already changed. And just when you're reeling from that, Ragnarok barrels in, the skies split, monsters charge, giants stomp mountains flat, and Odin doesn't flinch. This is the endgame he's long awaited. He rallies the gods in the golden hall of Valhalla, their voices a war drum beneath the rafters. The gates swing wide. Out come the warriors of legend, those who passed away with honor, their swords, once buried, now blazing. This is it, the final stand, not for victory, but for glory. Compare that to ancient Greece, where the afterlife is less inspiring. No golden halls, no roaring feasts, just a slow descent into shadow. A river, a boat, a silent ferryman. And only those with a coin in their mouth, a bribe for Karen, make it across. The rest? They wander, lost, not even demise is free. And if you mess it up, just ask Antigone, ask. Two brothers tear each other apart for the throne of Thebes, both die. Antigone, their sister, just wants to bury them. But the new king, Creon, decrees one gets honors, the other rots in the sun as a warning. Antigone refuses. Because in her world, burial isn't about ritual, It's about dignity, about the unbreakable bond between the living and the dead. And when she defies the decree, she's sentenced to die, because in demise, as in myth, the rules are both sacred and cruel. But stories like these don't just tell us about gods or graves. They tell us what a culture values, what it fears, what it refuses to forget. And whether it's a Viking feasting in Valhalla or a Greek soul crossing the Styx, the truth remains: demise in every myth is the mirror, not of what is, but of who we are. In ancient Greece, demise wasn't just the end of life, it was the beginning of a delicate, dangerous transition. And woe to those who didn't make it cleanly across. For the Greeks, burial was everything. Without it, your soul was stranded, marooned between this world and the next. No peace, no closure. Just a restless half-existence in the dusty margins of reality. So when King Creon of Thebes decreed that Polynices, the rebel brother, the so-called traitor, was to be denied burial, it wasn't just a punishment, it was a curse, a cosmic insult. He might as well have condemned him to a ghost's eternity. Enter Antigone. She wasn't thinking politics or power, she was thinking injury, duty, and the unbearable thought of her brother's body rotting in the sun, picked at by crows. She defied Creon's law, not because she wanted to be a martyr, but because she couldn't imagine a world where love bowed to law. And for the Greeks, her act wasn't just brave, it was sacred. Funeral rites weren't a family's private affair, they were a community's sacred obligation. The three-part ritual, preparation, procession, interment, wasn't just ceremony, it was passage, a release. Do it wrong, or not at all, and the soul couldn't move on, and neither could the living, because funerals were as much for the mourners as for the dead. They told a life story, filtered through the lens of what the community valued. They reminded everyone left behind, we go on, we survive, we remember, and through memory we rebuild. The funeral reabsorbed the family into society. It said, grief is part of the human cycle, and here's how we honor it. But not everyone got to grieve grandly. In 6th century Athens, the wealthy etched their legacies in marble, towering monuments to their own importance. But by the 5th century, a change had swept in. Simplicity, modesty. The grand was out. The humble stele was in. Why? Because Athens was no longer just a city, it was becoming an empire. The Delian League, once a scrappy alliance against Persia, had quietly morphed into Athenian hegemony. The cash rolled in, the skyline erupted in temples, the Parthenon gleamed like a crown on the city's brow. Athens was now a brand. And in this rising empire, the individual had to shrink. You didn't belong to your family, you belonged to the city. Your demise, your tomb, your epitaph, it all fed the myth of Athenian glory. Soldiers were buried not with family, but with their tribe. Their names listed in neat rows beneath soaring state markers. Private sorrow became public property. Even in demise, Athens owned you. Antigone's defiance, then, wasn't just about one burial. It was about resisting that pull between personal love and public law, between the sacred and the state. She could obey Creon and let her brother be devoured by birds, or she could follow her heart and the gods, knowing full well it might harm her. She chose her brother, and in doing so reminded everyone, then and now, that sometimes the rituals of grief are the last, best act of rebellion. It only took a handful of dirt, just a light, defiant scattering of soil over her brother's remains, and in that single act, Antigone chose the will of the gods over the rule of a king. She wasn't building a tomb, she wasn't performing a grand ceremony, She was making a statement, one that echoed all the way to Olympus. Creon was livid. This wasn't just disobedience, it was sacrilege against his authority. So he ordered a punishment as brutal as it was symbolic. Antigone, the woman who defied him to bury the dead, would herself be buried alive, entombed in a mountain cave, sealed up like a secret the state didn't want to confront. But the gods have a long memory. First, Creon's son, Antigone's betrothed, couldn't bear it. He took his own life. Then, stricken by grief, Creon's wife followed. One rebellious act, 3 demises, and a kingdom left staring at the cost of law without mercy. Sophocles wrote this almost 2,500 years ago, but it still bites like it was written yesterday. Because that moral tightrope Antigone walks, we're still balancing on it. Do you obey the laws of the land or the laws of conscience? When does justice demand disobedience? When does piety become protest? Antigone isn't just a character, she's a mirror held up to every society that's ever tried to decide where obedience ends and righteousness begins. And beneath all this talk of law and rebellion is a deep, pulsing belief that demise isn't the end. To the Greeks, demise was a journey to the underworld, a grey, echoing plain of memory and murmur. It was sad, yes, but not terrifying. The dead could grumble if forgotten or dishonored, but they weren't lurking in shadows waiting to strike. Not so in other places, not so in other times. Fast forward a few centuries to Serbia, 1725. Not Athens, not drama. This was something else entirely. A tiny village named Kisilova sits on the edge of nowhere. Cold forests, empty roads, the kind of place where stories grow faster than crops. And suddenly, 9 people are dead, gone in a week. No fever, no plague, just silence, confusion, fear. The whispers begin. They don't speak of Hades or judgment. They speak of the reanimated being of something or someone that passed away and then didn't stay dead. Something walking in the night. A familiar face at the door that should have stayed buried. The monster that used to be a man, because while Ragnarok gave us wolves and fire giants, and Athens gave us laws and gods, here the terror was more intimate. It wore your neighbor's face, it knew your name, and it came at night. Something was hunting in Kisilova, not an animal, not a plague, but something worse, something that looked like a man, moved like a shadow and harmed without a sound. They called it a night walker. Some said it strangled its victims in their sleep. Others whispered it feasted on flesh, drained injury, left remains as pale and empty as hollow gourds. And while it felt like hysteria, like the kind of wild tale born in dark forests and darker imaginations, it wasn't new. Not really. The idea that the dead might return, hungry, twisted, furious, is one of humanity's most persistent fears. You find it everywhere, across continents, across centuries. Wherever people buried their dead, they also feared they might come back, and not as angels. So when 9 people dropped dead in a week, the villagers of Kisilova weren't confused. They were terrified. They knew what was happening. The dead weren't staying dead. They called in the imperial authorities from Vienna, rational minds, men of enlightenment, men who believed in science, in order. The investigators listened, frowned, and went to the graveyard. There, they exhumed the body of the man who had passed away just before the demises began. What they found didn't match the textbooks. The remains was fresh, pink, bloated, mouth wet with what looked like injury. Hair and nails had grown. He looked less like a man buried days ago and more like someone dozing after a feast. Now, modern medicine would say decomposition. The skin shrinks, making nails and hair appear longer, blood pools, gases bloat, it's all biology. But the villagers didn't see biology, they saw a predator, and they did what people have done for centuries. When fear outpaces explanation, they acted and neutralized a fire that burned high into the night. Just to be sure, the story didn't die with the mythical being, it exploded. Vienna's newspapers spread the tale, whispers turned to headlines, and soon Europe had caught mythical being fever. But the story didn't stop there. In 1816, during a famously stormy summer in Switzerland, a group of poets and writers holed up in a villa had a ghost story contest. One tale would become Frankenstein. But another seed was planted that night too. Lord Byron, half joking, began a story about ancient injury drinkers from the East. He never finished it. But his physician, John Polidori, did. He wrote The Vampire, a sleek, seductive horror, unlike anything folklore had ever dreamed up. Gone was the bloated village remains. In came the aristocratic predator, elegant, pale, dangerous, a creature of chandeliers and whispered invitations. This new, mythical being was not just a monster, it was desire in fangs and velvet. And by the 19th century, that figure had evolved into a legend so potent he would outlive his author. Bram Stoker's Dracula, an immortal nobleman from the mysterious East, a creature of shadow who seduces, stalks and spreads terror through the heart of prim and proper Victorian London. The ultimate outsider. The parasite dressed as a prince. The mythical being had arrived, not just in stories, but in our dreams, our fears, our fantasies. A monster born in muddy village graveyards, now stalking the velvet halls of literature. The dead may fear the grave, but we fear what climbs out of it. Count Dracula, that pale nobleman from the Carpathians, doesn't just crave injury, he craves London. He wants the fog, the crowds, the bustle of the empire's heart. He wants to walk unnoticed through teeming streets, to blend in, to spread. And what Bram Stoker gave us in 1897 wasn't just a gothic horror story. It was a nightmare in reverse, a tale of reverse colonialism. Because while Britain was shipping its culture, goods and flags across the globe, Dracula shipped himself back. An Eastern outsider, an infiltrator, a parasite in a dinner jacket. Not content to haunt crumbling castles, he's here to colonize the colonizers. He's not just reanimated being, he's unwelcome, an infection, something foreign and irresistible, terrifying and magnetic. He pollutes with charm, corrupts with intimacy, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he transforms everything around him. Bram Stoker, born in Ireland, knew about being on the wrong side of empire. He understood exclusion, power imbalance, and the quiet fury of being ruled by someone else's crown. Through Dracula, he critiqued Victorian anxieties about race, class, immigration, gender, disease, even sexuality. All dressed in a cloak and a gentleman's grin. And the story, like its protagonist, refuses to die. Dracula has since stalked the snowy suburbs of Stockholm, lurked through sun-scorched ruins in post-apocalyptic LA, lingered near lockers in American high schools, whispering secrets in the ears of teenagers. He's been rewritten, reimagined, re-romanticized, but the core remains. He's desire in disguise, a mirror of everything we fear and want. Because even now those questions still bite. Who belongs? Who doesn't? What corrupts us? What seduces us? And what do we do when the line between monster and man gets a little too blurry? But while Dracula's shadow spreads across culture, the old gods of Norse myth meet a far grimmer fate. The battle is over. The final clash has come. Odin is gone. Thor too. The warriors of Valhalla lie broken, not victorious. The gods have fallen. The world ends, not with a whisper, but with flood and fire. This is Ragnarok, but it's not just a Norse thing. Floods crash through myth after myth like a divine reset button. The most famous, of course, is Noah. Humanity gets out of hand, greedy, violent, arrogant. So God wipes the slate clean. One ark, one family, two of every animal start again. But that same story ripples through Assyrian tablets, Egyptian tombs, and even Greek myth, like the tale of Baucis and Philemon, two peasants, a humble hut, a fire barely clinging to life. They live on the edge of a proud, heartless village. When two strangers come knocking, they offer warmth, wine, their only chairs, even the one goose they still have. And those strangers? Not beggars, gods. Mercury and Jupiter wandering in disguise, testing the hearts of mortals. The villagers failed. They slammed their doors. They chose pride over kindness. But Baucis and Philemon, they chose hospitality. So while the village is swept away in a divine deluge, their little cottage is spared. It's transformed into a temple. And the old couple, given one wish, to die together, to never part. Their story was written by Ovid during the reign of Augustus, a time when Rome was trying to appear calm, orderly, reborn from its past chaos. But under that polished marble was a city still pulsing with old fears. So Ovid gave them a story of simplicity, of virtue rewarded, a myth where the meek don't inherit the earth, they survive it. Because whether it's gods falling, monsters rising, or worlds drowning, myths remind us what endures: love, decency, offering, and the hope that even when the world ends, something kinder might begin. Augustus wanted the world to know he was a restorer of Rome, a restorer of piety. On his funerary monument, he boasts of resurrecting 28 temples in a single year. That wasn't just civic pride, it was a message. Rome was returning to virtue, to the old values, to the gods. And what better myth to illustrate that than the tale of Baucis and Philemon, an old couple, poor in coin but rich in heart, welcomed strangers into their crumbling hut. Not for gain, not for show, but because it was right. While their neighbours locked their doors and stuffed their faces, these two stoked dying embers poured watered wine and offered their last goose. For their kindness, the gods led them up a mountain. And from that height, the couple looked back and saw their village drowned. Streets gone, roofs swept away, all of it lost beneath a divine flood, except their home, which was no longer a hut, but a temple, a holy place, not because it had gold, but because it had grace. Then came the real reward, a wish, not wealth, not youth, not glory, just this: let us serve, let us stay together, let neither of us live to bury the other. And so it was. When their time came, the gods didn't claim them with thunder or fire. They let them bloom. Side by side they became trees, oak and linden, forever rooted in each other. It's a tale of love that doesn't demand spectacle, of faith that's quiet, of survival that turns into sanctity. And it mirrors another end. Ragnarok has passed, the gods are gone, the sea has swallowed the world, silence reigns, but not forever. From that stillness, life stirs again. Myths don't end, they cycle. The flood recedes, the mountain stands, and from the roots of grief, stories begin anew. Because storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's legacy. It's how humans stretch backward and forward through time. a way of whispering to those who came before us and to those who are still to come. Myths are irrational, messy, sometimes downright bizarre, but they resonate because they capture what logic can't. They hold our fears, our hopes, our contradictions. They're not maps of what we think. We have science for that. They're maps of what we feel. They tell us that kindness matters, that defiance can be divine, that demise is not the end. And so whether we're wandering through the streets of ancient Athens, the frozen shores of the north, or a humble village on the cusp of flood, we're still telling stories, still asking the big questions, still growing together like trees intertwined. In the dark woods of England where mist coils like memory around gnarled roots. In the mountains of the east, sharp and silent beneath an ancient sky. On desert plains, frozen fjords, stone temples and crumbling castles. The same words echo again and again as if whispered through time. Who are we? Where have we come from? Why is the world the way it is? And what lies beyond it? These aren't just questions. They're the heartbeat of humanity. They don't belong to any one people or place. They're carved into bone and sung around fires, etched in runes, painted on cave walls, woven into lullabies and screamed in battle. They thread through myth and legend, through gods and monsters, through floods and flames and endless rebirth. And they never stop, because to be human is to wonder, to seek, to fear, to hope. No matter the age, no matter the language, these questions remain. They are the thread that binds us to our ancestors and to those not yet born. They are the reason we keep telling stories, not because we know the answers, but because we never stop asking.